At 1447 local time, beneath a clear Caribbean sky and over calm southern waters, a United States carrier strike group moved steadily through international waters. There was no exercise underway, no alert posture, and no visible sign that anything unusual was about to happen. The carrier remained on its assigned track, aircraft operations were scheduled as normal, escort ships held their standard positions, and sensors watched the horizon with the quiet patience that defines life at sea. Then, without warning, the surface picture began to change. Inside the operations center, 6 new contacts appeared almost at the same time. They were small, fast-moving naval vessels, approaching from the west, entering the outer edge of the carrier group's screen. At first, their movement looked uneven. Their bearings were spread out, their speeds varied, and there was still room to believe they were simply passing through the area. That uncertainty did not last long. Within seconds, their pattern became sharper. All 6 vessels began accelerating in coordination. At sea, that kind of timing is rarely random. The track supervisor called it out immediately, and the room began updating bearings, speeds, and closest point of approach calculations in real time. The vessels were identified as Venezuelan naval units, recognized by their profiles and previous signal patterns. They were not broadcasting their intentions, they were not answering standard maritime calls, and they were closing in on a United States carrier formation that was operating lawfully in international waters. On the bridge, the officer of the deck received the report calmly. There was no raised voice, no dramatic reaction, and no sudden change in posture. The order was simple: maintain course and speed. This was not yet a crisis. It was a situation. A carrier strike group is built for moments exactly like this. Around the carrier, destroyers and cruisers form a layered protective screen. Each ship feeds information into a shared tactical picture, combining radar, electronic surveillance, optical tracking, and long-range awareness. Every platform sees part of the picture, but together they create something much larger, a complete view of the space around them. When 6 vessels move together, that view becomes very clear. By 1451, the Venezuelan formation changed again. What had started as a loose approach compressed into a shallow arc, angling toward the projected path of the carrier. It was a familiar kind of move: apply pressure without clearly crossing a legal boundary. Come close enough to be noticed. Stay just far enough away to avoid giving the other side a simple reason to escalate. Inside the operations center, the rules of engagement were reviewed quietly and carefully. The sequence was straightforward: warn, record, show presence, remain disciplined. Everyone understood the ladder of escalation, and nobody was eager to climb it. Bridge-to-bridge calls were transmitted first in English, then in Spanish. There was no response. The carrier did not slow. The escorts did not scatter. Helicopter crews remained ready, but their rotors stayed still. From outside the formation, the scene may have looked almost ordinary. From inside the command spaces, every second was being recorded. Course changes, speed increases, radar behavior, radio silence, spacing, timing, intent. The United States Navy does not rely on guesswork in situations like this. It documents. At 1456, closest point of approach calculations dropped again. One Venezuelan vessel surged briefly ahead of the others, then eased back into the group. Another shifted sideways, testing the edge of the screen. The movement looked choreographed, designed to suggest confidence and control. But to trained observers, it revealed something else: intent. The carrier's escorts adjusted their spacing slightly. Not sharply, not dramatically, just enough to preserve the geometry of the formation. Fire control systems remained inactive. Defensive systems stayed in a neutral posture. Electronic teams listened closely, recording every signal with forensic detail. Above and beyond the visible surface picture, maritime patrol assets extended the sensor envelope far past what the eye could see. This was not intimidation, it was observation from both sides. By 1500, the Venezuelan formation had fully committed to the maneuver. 6 vessels were now clearly attempting to shape the carrier group's path, trying to pressure it into adjusting course without ever making a direct demand. It was a calculated gamble: create enough tension to produce a political message, but not enough to trigger a formal response. But pressure works in both directions. Every maneuver was time-stamped. Every signal was captured. Every unsafe angle of approach was preserved through multiple sensors. What the Venezuelan commanders may have believed was a show of presence was actually becoming a detailed record, gathered under complete observation. And the carrier strike group kept moving. No warning round, no sudden posture shift, no unnecessary display. Just steel on course, aircraft cycling, escorts holding position, and a command team allowing the situation to unfold with patience. Experience had taught them a simple truth: in encounters like this, the side that reacts too early often gives the other side exactly what it wants. The 6 Venezuelan vessels were about to learn that lesson. By 1504 local time, the encounter had clearly moved beyond coincidence. The Venezuelan ships no longer looked like passing traffic. Their spacing tightened, their headings aligned, and their movement pointed not toward open sea lanes, but toward the future track of the carrier strike group. This was no longer parallel movement, it was positional pressure. Inside the operations center, the surface picture kept updating. Speed vectors stabilized, bearings converged, the closest point of approach projections for 2 of the contacts dropped below 4 nautical miles. That number did not automatically break a legal rule, but it mattered because of what it suggested. Distance alone does not define danger at sea. Pattern, speed, and intent matter just as much. The strike group commander was briefed with calm precision. No speculation, no dramatic language, just facts. 6 Venezuelan vessels, coordinated maneuvering, no response to hails, no declared exercise, no request for course adjustment. The guidance did not change. Maintain course and speed. Carrier strike groups do not maneuver impulsively. A single change in course affects dozens of moving pieces, escort ships, aircraft, logistics vessels, airspace timing, sensor coverage, and formation geometry. Turning without a clear reason can create openings. In contested waters, openings invite more pressure. At 1508, the Venezuelan lead vessel increased speed again. The change was not extreme, but it was enough to move slightly ahead of its formation and drift closer to the outer screen. Another vessel edged inward from the south, reducing the side spacing. Together, the moves created a subtle funnel, an attempt to influence the carrier's direction without directly challenging it. It was classic gray zone behavior. On the bridges of the American escorts, lookouts tracked hull numbers and deck activity. Personnel could be seen moving topside on the Venezuelan vessels, wearing helmets and shifting near mounted equipment. They were not clearly preparing anything, but they were not relaxed either. The visual feed was sent back into the operations center and matched with radar and electronic data. The picture was consistent. At 1512, bridge-to-bridge calls went out again. Still nothing. That silence mattered. In naval operations, radio silence is not just absence. It is a decision. It removes the possibility of misunderstanding and shifts responsibility onto the vessels refusing to acknowledge safety calls. By ignoring repeated messages, the Venezuelan ships were accepting ownership of whatever happened next. The strike group's response stayed controlled. Electronic teams continued passive collection. No interference, no active countermeasures. Just listening, logging, and building a complete picture. Every radar sweep from the approaching vessels was recorded. Power levels, scan rates, operating modes, and behavior patterns that once captured could be studied long after the moment had passed. Above the formation, a Seahawk helicopter was brought to readiness. The crew was strapped in, systems prepared, rotors still. It would not launch unless the situation required it. Presence was a tool, but timing mattered. At 1516, the projected closest approach dropped again. 2 Venezuelan vessels were now on track to pass inside 3 nautical miles if neither side changed course. That distance was not automatically unlawful, but paired with coordinated speed and shaping maneuvers, it was unsafe. Inside the operations center, the language in verbal reports shifted. They were no longer simply contacts. They were approaching vessels. Language matters because it frames decisions. The escorts adjusted again, preserving the screen without signaling escalation. Fire control radars remained inactive. Defensive mounts stayed neutral. From the outside, nothing looked dramatic. From the inside, every movement was deliberate. This was the moment many provocations are designed to create. The moment the other side changes course first. A small deviation could become a headline. A slight turn could be presented as proof of pressure. But that turn never came. The carrier held steady, cutting through the calm Caribbean water as if nothing unusual were happening. Flight operations continued. Aircraft remained active on deck. The message was not spoken, but it was unmistakable. This formation would not be pushed off its path. By 1520, the Venezuelan vessels had fully committed. All 6 were maneuvering in a coordinated pattern designed to intersect the strike group's route within minutes. This was the closest they had come, the tightest geometry of the encounter, and the point where miscalculation carried the greatest risk. Still, there was no answer on the radio. What the Venezuelan commanders could not see was the larger tactical picture forming around them. They were not boxing in a carrier. They were moving deeper into a space that was being documented, monitored, and controlled from multiple layers. Pressure had been applied. Now the consequences were beginning to form. At 1523 local time, the encounter crossed a quiet but important line. One Venezuelan vessel activated its surface search radar in an active mode. It was not a targeting signal, and it was not a direct combat action, but it was no longer passive observation either. The signal registered immediately across the carrier group's electronic surveillance network, clean, distinct, and unmistakable. Inside the operations center, the call was made calmly. They had gone active. That one change altered the character of the entire encounter. Active emissions are choices. They announce presence. They reveal technical behavior. They show trained analysts how a system searches, scans, and interprets the world around it. Range, sweep rate, power output, detection behavior, all of it becomes visible. What may look like confidence to one side can look like opportunity to the other. The strike group did not react outwardly. Course and speed stayed the same, but internally the posture shifted. Electronic teams moved from routine monitoring into full-spectrum collection. Every pulse from the Venezuelan radar was captured, time-stamped, and matched with position and movement. Patterns began appearing within seconds. No interference was used, no countermeasure was activated. The objective was not confrontation, the objective was clarity. At 15:25, two Venezuelan vessels changed speed sharply, pushing ahead in a staggered movement. Their wakes stretched behind them, and the formation compressed again. The maneuver reduced safe separation and tightened the calculations even further. It was not necessarily illegal, but it was intentionally uncomfortable. That was the mistake. At sea, risk is not measured by distance alone. It is measured by predictability. By compressing their formation while radiating actively, the Venezuelan vessels had made themselves easier to read. Their actions turned from pressure into a fully visible tactical problem. On the carrier's bridge, the captain watched the plot update in silence. He did not order a turn. He did not issue a dramatic warning. He authorized the next measured step. Launch the helicopter. At 15:27, an MH-60 Seahawk lifted from the deck of a nearby escort, climbing smoothly into the afternoon sky. It did not display hostility. It did not make an unsafe pass. It simply moved with control and purpose toward the Venezuelan formation. Its sensors came online immediately. Electro-optical systems focused on bridge windows. Infrared sensors mapped engine heat and deck movement. Precision marking systems remained non-destructive, visible, and impossible to ignore. The aircraft did not fly directly over the ships. It held an offset position at a safe distance, broadcasting presence without provocation. Then the radio message went out. Venezuelan naval vessels, this is a United States Navy helicopter. You are conducting unsafe maneuvers in international waters. Alter course immediately. The message was repeated in Spanish. This time there was movement on the Venezuelan decks. Personnel shifted. Binoculars were raised. One vessel hesitated for a moment before its wake shortened. Another maintained speed briefly, then drifted a few degrees outward, breaking the geometry of the attempted block. Inside the operations center, the effect was immediate. Closest point of approach values stabilized. The risk began to drop, but the larger consequence had already happened. Every second of the approach had been recorded. Every emission, every speed change, every unsafe angle, every attempt to shape the carrier's path had been captured by surface radar, airborne optics, infrared sensors, and electronic surveillance systems. Time and position were now fixed facts, not competing interpretations. The Venezuelan commanders had intended to apply pressure without consequence. Instead, they had created evidence. At 15:31, the active radar emissions stopped. That silence spoke even louder than the earlier radio silence. One by one, the Venezuelan vessels began reducing speed. Their formation loosened. The shallow arc dissolved into parallel tracks. The gap widened, the same gap they had spent the previous minutes trying to close. The Seahawk remained on station for another pass. Steady, watchful, non-provocative. Then it banked away and returned to its ship. No dramatic display, no warning burst, no unnecessary escalation. The carrier strike group never changed course. What may have looked from a distance like a bold attempt to pressure a carrier ended in a quiet withdrawal of momentum. Not because of raw force, but because of exposure. At sea, mistakes are not always loud. Sometimes the mistake is simply choosing to be seen too clearly. By 15:34 local time, the confrontation had lost its force. The 6 Venezuelan vessels were still present, still visible on radar and through optical systems, but the geometry had changed. Speeds had dropped across the formation. Headings drifted outward a few degrees at a time. What had been a coordinated attempt to influence the carrier's path was now a looser parallel movement, cautious and corrective. Inside the operations center, the change was obvious. Closest approach values widened. Risk levels returned to normal. The surface picture settled into something familiar, shadowing, not blocking. The strike group commander did not issue new orders. None were needed. The carrier continued on its original heading. Aircraft operations remained uninterrupted. Escorts held station. From the outside, the scene looked ordinary again. From the inside, it marked the moment the encounter was effectively over, but the aftermath was only beginning. Every system aboard the strike group shifted into post-event processing. Sensor logs were consolidated. Radar tracks were synchronized with visual and infrared footage. Electronic emissions were compared against known libraries. What had taken less than an hour to unfold became a permanent operational record, something that could be replayed, analyzed, and referenced again and again. This is where modern naval power truly asserts itself. Capability is one instrument. Information is another. The Venezuelan vessels had disengaged without a dramatic incident. But the cost of their maneuver remained. Their formation behavior, response times, emissions discipline, and command coordination had all been observed under pressure. Patterns were identified. Tendencies were noted. Future encounters would begin with those details already understood. At 1541, a final bridge-to-bridge call was transmitted by the American escorts. It was not a threat. It was a safety advisory delivered in standard professional language, reminding all vessels to maintain safe separation in international waters. There was no reply. None was needed. The Seahawk was secured on deck. Its crew was debriefed immediately. Sensor packages were transferred, timelines annotated, and observations added to the record. Nothing about the flight needed headlines. That was the point. Quiet documentation often carries more weight than public spectacle. For the Venezuelan commanders, the outcome was difficult to present as success. There had been no major confrontation, no open crisis, and no visible moment they could frame as victory. But the carrier had not altered course. The strike group had not slowed. The attempted block had failed without ever becoming a public drama. For the United States Navy, the result was exactly what disciplined command aims for: restraint without concession, presence without provocation, and control without escalation. That balance is never accidental. It is trained, rehearsed, and repeated. Carrier strike groups operate with the understanding that every close encounter may later be recorded, edited, misrepresented, or politicized. That is why procedures are strict, language is precise, and decisions are logged in real time. The goal is not to win an argument in the moment. The goal is to make sure that when events are reviewed later by commanders, allies, or international observers, the facts stand on their own. By 1550, the Venezuelan vessels had fallen well outside any meaningful intercept geometry. They remained on radar, but their movement was no longer tactical. The pressure phase was over. What remained was analysis. In the hours that followed, intelligence teams aboard the strike group would break the encounter down frame by frame. Not to escalate the situation, but to prepare for the next one. Every Navy learns something when boundaries are tested. The difference lies in how those lessons are absorbed. On that afternoon, one side learned that restraint does not equal vulnerability. The other learned that trying to pressure a carrier strike group can create consequences that are not immediately visible from the surface. No public statement was required. No dramatic announcement was necessary. The message had already been delivered with complete clarity. In modern naval operations, some of the most decisive moments pass quietly. Long after the Venezuelan vessels faded back into the wider surface picture, the carrier strike group continued on its assigned route. There was no celebration, no change in posture, and no visible sign of triumph. Just disciplined routine. Flight schedules maintained, watches rotated, sensors scanning an ocean that never truly stops moving. From outside the formation, it may have seemed as though nothing had happened. Inside the command spaces, the encounter was already becoming a lesson. By early evening, the collected data had been assembled into a single operational record. Radar tracks were aligned with infrared imagery. Electronic signatures were cataloged down to frequency bands and pulse behavior. Timestamps matched course changes to the second. Nothing depended on opinion. Everything rested on evidence. That is how modern naval encounters are judged. Not by who came closest first, not by who tried to create the strongest impression, but by who maintained control while the other side revealed more than it intended. The 6 Venezuelan vessels had attempted to apply pressure in international waters without clearly crossing a formal boundary. In doing so, they exposed how they maneuver under stress, how they coordinate across multiple hulls, and how quickly discipline can weaken when a situation does not unfold as planned. Those lessons would not be forgotten. Carrier strike groups are designed to deter without escalating. Their strength is not only in aircraft, sensors, and defensive reach, but in the predictability of their response. When a formation holds course under pressure, it removes uncertainty from the equation. And uncertainty is often the only leverage a smaller force can hope to create. In this case, that leverage never appeared. Instead, the encounter reinforced a reality that has shaped naval operations for decades. Restraint backed by capability can be more difficult for an opponent to manage than open hostility. It denies them a dramatic narrative. It denies them justification. It denies them the reaction they may be trying to provoke. For the sailors involved, the event became another entry in a long record of close approaches and precise decisions. No announcements, no grand gestures, just proof that training had translated into execution. For planners and analysts ashore, it became something more, a case study in how gray zone tactics unfold in real time and how they can be neutralized without a single dramatic action. It showed the value of layered awareness, disciplined command, and patience under pressure. Most importantly, it reaffirmed that freedom of navigation is not defended through theatrics. It is defended through consistency. The carrier strike group did not turn away. It did not speed up. It did not respond in kind. It simply continued. And that continuation carried more weight than any warning ever could. In the days that followed, there were no major public statements from Caracas or Washington addressing the encounter directly. None were necessary. The ocean has a way of absorbing moments like this. Ships pass, tracks separate. The surface returns to calm, but the record remains. Every Navy understands this, even if few say it publicly. Encounters like this shape future behavior. They influence how close is considered too close, how far pressure can be pushed, and how quickly that pressure collapses when met by disciplined resolve. The lesson from that afternoon in the Caribbean was not about confrontation. It was about limits. 6 vessels attempted to shape the movement of a carrier strike group. They did not succeed, not because of a dramatic show of power, but because they misunderstood what they were facing. In the end, the strongest response was not escalation. It was restraint carried out with absolute confidence. And at sea, confidence backed by capability remains one of the most decisive advantages of all.